Hey guys, tonight we set sail together not on a calm sea but into a fog-shrouded corner of Roman history, one where a legion of hardened soldiers marches into Britannia and is never seen again. The disappearance of Rome's Ninth Legion, the Legion IX Hispana, has puzzled historians, inspired novelists and stirred countless late-night theories. Imagine it, thousands of trained fighters, their shields gleaming, their sandals crunching through the damp soil of Britain, and then silence. No final battle cry recorded, no triumph or defeat carved into marble, only an eerie vanishing act that would make even a stage magician jealous. And here's a reality check. You probably wouldn't have survived marching through northern Britannia with them, given the cold, the bogs, the rebels, and the charming local tradition of ambushing strangers with sharp objects. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, drop into the comments where in the world you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Now find yourself a cozy seat or a soft bed, let your mind begin to unwind, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The story of the Ninth Legion begins in the fires of the late Roman Republic, long before Britannia ever appears on the imperial map. Raised in Spain, hence Hispana, the legion fought under Julius Caesar during his conquest of Gaul in the 1st century before the Common Era. A mainstream historical fact is that they took part in Caesar's campaigns in Gaul and crossed the Rubicon with him in 49 before the Common Era, which pretty much made them founding members of the Caesar's Greatest Hits compilation. They earned a reputation for toughness, resilience, and, let's be honest, sometimes excessive enthusiasm for plundering. By the time Rome extended its grip to the misty Isles of Britain, the Ninth Legion had already been bloodied and seasoned in decades of war. They were posted to Britannia during the early years of the conquest launched by Emperor Claudius in 43 of the Common Era. And this is where their fate becomes tied to the island that would one day swallow them whole. Britannia was not a cosy holiday retreat. The weather was damp, the locals were restless, and the supply chains were about as reliable as trying to get a pizza delivered to Hadrian's Wall. Historians still argue whether the Legion's first major setback on the island foreshadowed its later disappearance. In 60 or 61, Queen Boudica of the Iceni tribe led a rebellion that nearly drove Rome out of Britain. The Ninth marched to confront her forces but were ambushed and decimated. Ancient accounts claim their commander barely escaped and the survivors fled back to their camp. This event is mainstream fact. Tacitus himself records that the legion was cut to pieces. Imagine the humiliation of Roman soldiers, supposed masters of the world, running for their lives from tribespeople armed with chariots and furious determination. Quirky tidbit: Boudica supposedly painted herself blue with woad, which while terrifying in battle must have made laundry day an absolute nightmare. Yet despite that disaster, the Ninth Legion did not vanish then. They were reinforced, rebuilt, and stationed in York Eboracum for decades afterward. Archaeological inscriptions prove this much. Stone tablets and monuments mark their presence well into the 2nd century. Soldiers carved dedications to their gods, left graffiti in barracks, and generally behaved like men who expected their army careers to be recorded for posterity. But somewhere between these carved stones and the next historical references, the Ninth slips into shadow. No definitive record explains their end. Theories multiply like rabbits. Were they annihilated in a later rebellion in northern Britain? Did they march beyond Hadrian's Wall into Caledonia, modern Scotland, only to be wiped out by tribes who didn't appreciate foreign guests? Or were they quietly transferred to the eastern provinces, disappearing not through a dramatic ambush, but through the slow erosion of paperwork and memory? Historians still argue whether the Ninth's fate was a bloody battlefield or a dull, bureaucratic shuffle. And honestly, both options feel suspiciously Roman, either gory drama or boring administration. To picture what it meant for a legion to vanish, pause for a moment. A Roman legion at this time might number around 5,000 soldiers, plus camp followers, engineers, cooks, smiths and families. We're not just talking about men with swords, we're talking about an entire mobile community, a moving city of tents and wagons. To erase such a group is like watching a small town vanish from the map. One day smoke curls from their cooking fires, the next only ashes remain. The silence in the sources is almost theatrical. No Roman writer explains the Ninth's disappearance directly. It's like everyone collectively shrugged and said, "Let's not talk about that." Which, if you think about it, is exactly the kind of silence that fuels centuries of speculation. Some modern scholars even suspect the Romans intentionally buried the memory of a humiliating defeat. After all, empire building thrives on propaganda, not on stories of legions marching off stage left. And here lies the mystery that keeps us awake tonight. How can a force so large, so vital, and so entrenched in the machinery of empire simply vanish? The ruins of Roman Britain give us glimpses, fort walls crumbling into fields, inscriptions half erased by weather coins stamped with emperors long forgotten. They whisper of presence, of power, and of loss, but they never tell us what truly happened to the Ninth. So as you close your eyes, picture this. A line of soldiers in segmented armour shields, gleaming standards high, tramping north through mist-wrapped valleys. The sound of iron on stone fades into the distance, and then nothing. Only the whisper of wind across the heather remains, leaving us to wonder whether the earth swallowed them, or history simply turned the page and forgot. The Ninth Legion, formerly known as Legion IX Hispana, does not appear overnight in Britannia. It has a long pedigree, one stitched together through blood loyalty and a fair share of Roman bureaucracy. Raised during the late Republic, it gains its Hispana surname after hard campaigning in the Iberian Peninsula. Over time, its banners carry weight not just because of its eagle, but because of the memory of campaigns fought far from Rome. Soldiers walking into Britannia would have heard the stories of their legions' past glories whispered around campfires, a mixture of pride and grim warning. To join the Ninth is to inherit a history, though whether it ends in triumph or tragedy remains uncertain. By the reign of Augustus, the Ninth has already seen plenty of action. They march under Julius Caesar in Gaul, fight at Pharsalus, and later garrison Spain. A mainstream historical fact places them firmly in those theatres, their name carved into inscriptions that survive. They are not the pampered favourites of Rome, but the workhorse units sent wherever trouble stirs. By the time Emperor Claudius dreams of adding Britannia to the empire in 43 CE, the Ninth is chosen as one of the legions for the invasion. Their arrival on Britain's shores is dramatic war horns echoing over the surf shields, glinting officers barking orders as they step into a land the Romans consider foreign, wild, and rich in potential taxes. The legion's presence in Britannia grows more entrenched after the invasion. Archaeological traces tiles stamped with their name altars, inscribed with dedications, show they build guard and enforce Roman rule across the new province. Fortress towns like Lincoln, Lindum, Colonia bear their imprint. When a farmer unearthed a brick with the Ninth's mark centuries later, it was like a breadcrumb left in the soil, proof that their boots once pressed there. Quirky tidbits and bricks show signs of hasty stamping. Crooked impressions, as if the workers cared more about speed than neatness, suggesting legionaries often doubled as construction crews. Imagine a battle-hardened soldier grumbling that his sword arm was meant for war, not clay pressing. Their most famous moment, though, comes during the revolt of Boudicca around 60 CE. This is the rebellion that shakes Roman Britain to its foundations. The Ninth rushes to confront the uprising, but records describe them suffering a devastating ambush. Only the cavalry under their commander escapes. It is a brutal lesson Britannia is no easy frontier. Yet like a cat with 9 lives, the Legion survives, reinforced and rebuilt. Historians still argue whether this defeat scars their reputation permanently, or whether their resilience adds to their mystique. Either way, the story of their near destruction, followed by recovery, becomes part of their legend. Life in Britannia for legionaries is not all rebellion and war. Between campaigns, they dig ditches, raise forts, and keep uneasy peace in garrisons. Imagine evenings where soldiers carve small graffiti on walls, crude drawings of ships, games of dice, or even complaints about rations. Archaeologists have uncovered styluses suggesting some men kept notes or letters. The diet is surprisingly diverse: bread, porridge beans, local meats, and sometimes imported wine or olive oil. Light joke number 1 soldier, scrawled on a shard of pottery, something like Ursus owes me beer, proving that debts among friends are as eternal as empire. Their commanders, often senators or equestrians appointed by Rome, come and go, but the legion itself becomes a fixture in the northern frontier. For decades, IX Hispana holds a reputation as reliable muscle anchoring Rome's ambitions in an unruly land. To the locals, though, they must appear as an occupying force of endless discipline and iron will. Picture a Briton farmer leading his ox past a Roman fort above the ditch, and rampart-helmeted figures stand a visible reminder that Rome watches. Some locals adapt trading and thriving under Roman order. Others simmer with resentment, their grievances storing like dry wood awaiting a spark. By the late 1st century, the Ninth's fortunes seem steady. They build at York Eboracum, establishing a stronghold that later becomes one of Roman Britain's key military centres. The fortress foundations are still traceable today, a testament to their engineering. A mainstream historical fact is that York's rise to prominence as a military and later imperial city owes much to IX Hispana's presence. Officers there may have believed their work would last forever. Soldiers likely joked about York's damp climate, the rains soaking cloaks of indigo or russet, and the mud that swallowed sandals whole. Like joke number 2, a legionary probably quipped that Britannia has 2 seasons wet and muddier. Their banners showing the charging bull symbol of the Legion become familiar across the province. Bulls powerful and unyielding reflect the image Rome likes to project, yet beneath the bull's bravado lies vulnerability. The Legion has already faced annihilation once, and the land they patrol is far from pacified. Tribes beyond the northern borders remain hostile, their alliances shifting like mist across the hills. As the 1st century closes, these tensions build, and the 9th, though hardened, finds itself walking into uncertainty. Historians still debate when and how exactly the Legion meets its mysterious fate, but Section 2 reminds us before their disappearance. IX Hispana is not a ghost, but a living, breathing force with history, victories, defeats, and daily routines. They are soldiers with calloused hands, crooked brick stamps, and complaints about rations, not merely a vanished name in dusty annals. Understanding their legend means first understanding that they are real men who once walked the muddy roads of Britannia, laughing, swearing, and sometimes wondering if Rome's reach was worth the cold and rain. Like joke number 3, to leave you smiling, imagine a legionary writing home. Dear Mother, Britannia is beautiful if you enjoy drizzle mud pies and being stared at by sheep with bad attitudes. Along Rome's northern frontier, the 9th Legion settles into a rhythm of garrison duty patrols and constant watchfulness. Britannia is not the Mediterranean world of olive groves and sun-baked plazas. Here the damp wind cuts through cloaks and the earth clings to boots in heavy clumps. The legionaries stationed in these northern zones learn quickly that their forts are more than outposts. They are lifelines, small islands of Roman order surrounded by seas of uncertainty. Wooden palisades creak under rain, and stone walls rise slowly as engineers experiment with sturdier defences. Smoke from cooking fires curls through slate skies, while beyond the ramparts mist conceals shadowed figures on distant ridges. The frontier is a place of tension where the clash between Roman ambition and local resistance is never far from breaking into open hostility. One mainstream historical fact is that before Hadrian's Wall is even conceived, earlier lines of forts and roads crisscross northern Britain. Archaeological remains of these pre-Hadrianic defences confirm Rome's attempt to draw boundaries and control the movements of tribes. The 9th plays its part in maintaining this uneasy order, garrisoning strongholds like York and marching to bolster outlying posts. Each fort acts like a heartbeat in Rome's circulatory system, pumping troops and supplies into wild terrain that resist being tamed. Yet the further north they go, the thinner the lifelines stretch, and the more vulnerable the Legion becomes. Inside the forts daily, life mixes routine with anxiety. Soldiers sharpen swords, drill in formation, and repair equipment, but they also share jokes, gamble with knucklebones, and complain about rations that never seem plentiful enough. Quirky tidbit, some excavated sites in Britain reveal writing tablets where soldiers requested extra beer-warm clothing or even leave passes. One famous letter shows a soldier's wife inviting a friend to her birthday party, a reminder that the garrisons are not only martial centres, but small communities where families try to cling to normality. Picture children chasing each other between barracks, women tending fires, and legionaries grumbling that the stew is thin again. Life on the edge of empire is never entirely bleak, but it is never fully secure. Beyond the walls, the tribes of northern Britain, later remembered as Caledonians or Picts, watch and wait. They are not nameless barbarians, but organised peoples with their own leaders, rituals and rivalries. Some trade with the Romans, exchanging hides, cattle, or even slaves for iron tools and trinkets. Others bide their time, harbouring resentment against an empire that taxes, demands tribute, or punishes rebellion with fire and iron. Historians still argue whether the northern tribes pose a constant existential threat, or if they become convenient scapegoats for Rome's internal failures. What is certain is that the 9th lives daily with the possibility that the quiet hills conceal enemies who could strike when least expected. The roads connecting forts become arteries of empire, straight lines cut across fields lined with ditches and watchtowers. Marching along them, legionaries sink into rhythms of boots on stone shields, clattering and breath steaming in the chill air. These roads symbolise Rome's determination to impose order on unruly landscapes, but they also expose columns of soldiers to ambush, for a road can guide enemies just as easily as it guides friends. Imagine trudging mile after mile, rain dripping from helmets, knowing that behind the next bend shadows might be more than trees. Light joke, number 11 soldier probably muttered that if Rome insists on straight roads, it should also insist on straight weather sun, one day drizzle the next, not all at once. Forts like Vindolanda, south of the future line of Hadrian's Wall, leave us remarkable glimpses into this world. Wooden writing tablets preserve everyday correspondence, some of it astonishingly mundane. Requests for socks and sandals remind us that the climate is harsher than the men expected. Another tablet complains about the quality of beer, a problem that transcends centuries. These fragments reveal not an abstract legion, but individuals, men with sore feet, cold fingers, and the eternal desire for a decent drink. The ninth, though not directly named in all these finds, inhabits the same landscape, sharing the same needs and discomforts. Local resistance is not always outright war. Sometimes it is sabotage supplies, disappearing scouts misled, or livestock driven off. Farmers sympathetic to the tribes might refuse to sell grain, forcing the Romans to stretch their supply lines further. Rumours of rebellion circulate constantly, and whether they are true or not, they gnaw at nerves. A commander might pace a rampart at night, wondering if tomorrow brings another quiet sunrise or a sudden onslaught. Historians still debate whether the ninth's eventual disappearance begins with this steady drip of tension, eroding morale rather than a single dramatic catastrophe. Religious rituals seek to steady spirits. In stone shrines within the forts, legionaries carve altars to Jupiter, Mars, or local deities they adopt into their pantheon. Offerings of coins, wine, or small figurines rest at these sacred sites. Quirky tidbits, some altars include dedications to local river gods, suggesting that Romans recognized the power of Britain's landscape as both ally and enemy. The soldier might pray for safe passage across a ford or for victory in battle, muttering his plea while clutching a token from home. These small acts of devotion underscore how fragile confidence can feel on the frontier. Light joke number 2, one weary legionary likely joked that the gods answered prayers for victory faster than prayers for dry socks. His comrades squelching around in mud-soaked boots probably agreed. Even with their hardships, the ninth continues to project Roman authority. Patrols extend beyond the fort's columns of soldiers moving through misty valleys and heather-covered hills. Locals watching from ridges see the shining line of armour and hear the beat of drums. To some it looks like inevitability, to others provocation. These patrols remind everyone, friend and foe, that Rome intends to stay, yet the farther those columns march, the more they risk isolation. A skirmish far from the fort may leave no survivors to tell the tale. Light joke number 3, picture a young recruit grumbling after weeks of patrol. They promised adventure, but all I've discovered is mud in 50 shades. Veterans laugh because mud is as eternal as empire. The ninth in this era is caught between strength and vulnerability. Their forts rise sturdier each year, their roads extend further, their rituals adapt to new landscapes. Yet the tension never dissolves. Britannia's frontier is not a line that holds, it is a shifting zone, where peace one week can fracture into chaos the next. For the legionaries of IX Hispana, life is a constant rehearsal for dangers that may never come, or may come all at once, swallowing them in the silence that history still struggles to explain. Rumours move faster than soldiers. Along the frontier in Britannia, whispers of uprisings slip between markets, forts and taverns. A merchant from a northern village swears he saw tribes gathering in the hills. A scout returns with tales of bonfires flickering at night where no bonfires should be. A farmer mentions that the usual trade in hides and grain has slowed, replaced with hard stares and silence. For the 9th Legion stationed in this tense environment, the sense of unease grows steadily, like water dripping into a jar that one day will overflow. Even if nothing explodes today, everyone feels that something is brewing. One mainstream historical fact is that the tribes of northern Britain, later remembered as Caledonians, do not remain passive under Roman rule. Accounts from Roman historians describe how these groups resist occupation, sometimes through open warfare, other times through guerrilla harassment. The Roman state interprets nearly every flicker of resistance as a threat to authority, which makes commanders edgy. It also means the soldiers of the 9th live in a world where rebellion feels like a constant possibility. They patrol roads, watch over villages, and build forts not just for defence but for intimidation, projecting Rome's power as a warning. Yet even as their walls rise higher, their nerves fray. Inside the forts, rumours can be as dangerous as swords. Imagine legionaries sharing dice games by torchlight voices lowered as they repeat gossip. A tribe is forging alliances. A war leader is rising, uniting clans. Some stories are pure invention. others carry kernels of truth. Quirky tidbit in Vindolanda, one surviving letter written by a Roman officer complains about the wretched Britons and their unpredictable behaviour, showing that officers themselves sometimes contributed to the swirl of fear and disdain. The Ninth is not immune to such anxieties. Every rumour tightens the atmosphere, leaving men restless and ready to believe the worst. Historians still argue whether a coordinated rebellion ever truly threatened the Ninth in this period, or whether Roman paranoia amplified scattered unrest. Some suggest that after the devastation of Boudicca's revolt, a generation earlier, Roman commanders lived with perpetual dread of another uprising. Every campfire story of gathering warriors may have been exaggerated, yet it is equally possible that real alliances formed tribes seeing a chance to strike at isolated forts. The truth may be buried under the silence of those who never wrote down their side of the story. The countryside adds to the tension. Hills and forests conceal movements, rivers cut natural barriers, and the weather cloaks everything in rain and fog. Patrols find tracks leading into forests but lose them among roots and shadows. Sheep vanish from fields, crops stand trampled, and isolated farmsteads report strange visitors. To Roman minds, all this feeds the narrative of looming rebellion. Soldiers mutter that the land itself seems against them, with hills echoing in ways that distort sounds. Like joke number 1, a legionary probably told his friend, "I heard war drums last night," only to be corrected. That was the cook pounding stale bread into something edible. Commanders respond with shows of force. Columns march through villages, shields gleaming banners high to remind locals who holds authority. Yet these parades often achieve the opposite. Rather than reassurance, they stir resentment. Some villages close their doors, others offer sullen silence instead of welcome. A few chiefs still bring tribute, but even those gestures feel perfunctory, like buying time. The Ninth veterans of decades of war recognise the signs, the lull before a storm. Religious rituals also intensify. Priests lead sacrifices, pouring wine onto altars and slaughtering bulls as offerings to Mars and Jupiter. Soldiers hope these ceremonies steady nerves and win divine favour. Quirky tidbit archaeologists have discovered small clay figurines buried near shrines in northern Britain, possibly left as private votives, suggesting individuals reach for luck in their own ways. Imagine a soldier slipping a tiny figure into the ground, whispering a prayer for survival, then hurrying back to duty. These personal gestures reveal how much the tension weighed on ordinary men. Light joke number 2, one soldier likely muttered during a ritual, "If the gods are truly with us, maybe they'll start by giving us dry boots." His neighbour nodded, wringing out his cloak. As rumours swirl, some officers send out scouts deeper into tribal territory. Reports return inconsistent. One says hundreds of warriors gather, another swears the hills are empty. The confusion only heightens anxiety. Historians still debate whether Roman intelligence in Britannia was truly effective, or if scouts often returned with stories designed to please their commanders. Either way, the Ninth may have been preparing for an enemy they could not see clearly, one that slipped into the forests and dissolved like mist. The tension bleeds into everyday life. Marketplaces once lively with exchange now feel subdued. Traders carry fewer goods, villagers linger less. Roman soldiers sense the chill, and some refuse to go unarmed even inside the walls of their forts. Imagine an officer reprimanding a soldier for keeping a spear by his cot only to keep his own sword closer than usual. Fear becomes contagious, passed from commander to recruit, from villager to merchant, until the entire province feels on edge. Like joke number 3, a weary soldier might have remarked, "The only rebellion I'm sure of is in my stomach after last night's stew. At least laughter gives momentary relief, even if unease returns with the dawn." By now, the Ninth Legion stands at a crossroads between rumour and reality. They hear whispers of rebellion, see signs of unrest, and feel the creeping sense that the land itself resists their presence. Whether or not a coordinated uprising truly gathers strength, the men live in a world where danger could erupt without warning. The tension is almost tangible, coiling tighter with each passing day. Soon, the Ninth will march into that fog of uncertainty, carrying not only their shields and spears, but also the weight of rumours that might yet become prophecy. The order to march north arrives not with fanfare, but with the quiet confidence of routine that hides a tremor of dread. Couriers clatter through the gate at dawn, cloaks dripping with last night's rain wax, seals intact on wooden tablets. Officers vanish into the Principia voices, low styluses scratching maps unrolled. By mid-morning, the signal passes down, the line pack-up form ranks move. The Ninth Legion does not ask why. The Ninth always moves when told. Yet even the veterans feel it. This departure carries a different weight, like a drumbeat you do not hear so much as feel in your chest. A mainstream historical fact frames the day Roman armies on active campaign build a fresh marching camp almost every evening, ditch first, then rampart, then the checkerboard of streets, so that 8-man tent groups, the contubernia, sleep in a pattern drilled into muscle memory. The Ninth follows that doctrine to the letter. Before the first mile, quartermasters check loads and issue rations. Before the second, engineers stride ahead with measuring rods, and the gromer the surveyor's cross. A legion's order is an armour worn against chaos. Still order cannot banish the smell of wet leather, the bite of wind off the moors, or the animal scents that eyes watch from the tree line. They file out by cohort standards high. The bull of the Ninth glints whenever the cloud cover thins the Aquilefer's eagle, cloth-wrapped against the drizzle. Cornicins lift curved horns to keep cadence. Hobnailed boots drum a rhythm on alternating stretches of Roman road and spongy turf. The typical legionary bears a grim load shield on arm tupelaire balanced for quick throwing kit slung from a forked pole-spare tunic, cooking pot steaks for the knight's palisade and a share of flour and grain. Quirky tidbit muttered with a half-smile, since the days of Marius they call themselves Marius's mules, beasts of burden disguised as men. By some estimates, a soldier carries 20 to 30 kilograms, about 44 to 66 feet pardon-pounds. Old habits die hard, and he jokes that the pack is growing ambitions of its own. Like joke number one man insists his pack now answers to Centurion. The road north narrows into tracks that slide between hills and peat-stained streams. Bridges sag where past rains have gnawed at timbers. Engineers leap down with axes and adzes whispering measurements, while optionees direct men to lay planks and lash braces. The column compresses and breathes like a Lungholt fix reform forward. On open ground they stretch for what looks like forever standards, dotting the grey-green sweep. In woods, everything compresses, the clink of armour is louder. So is silence between clinks. Historians still argue whether this push is a punitive strike against a gathering confederation, a confident show to cow traders who hedge their loyalties, or a hard gamble to extend Rome's map into a land that prefers not to be mapped. On the ground, it hardly matters. The Ninth marches because the Ninth must. Scouts move like ghosts. Their cloaks indigo, then mud blend into ridge and scrub. They bring back fragments. A cold fire ring, fresh hoof prints near a ford, a single black feather tangled in heather, as if a warning or a joke. The prefect of scouts sketches in the air with his dagger tip, then wipes the blade clean on his palm, an old habit. A charm. The commander nods, adjusts the pace, and sends a cohort arcing wide to test the shoulder of the hills. The legion's procession adapts like a river around stones. By noon, the drizzle graduates into full rain, that British specialty with 2 modes sideways and more sideways. Cloaks wick until they do not. Water trickles under collars and down spines. The kitchen mules snort and pinneers. Somewhere near the middle of the column a cartwheel wedges in rutted clay. A dozen hands lift 2 curse with creativity and the creak resumes. Light joke number 2, a veteran announces that Britannia has only 3 seasons rain, wind and brace yourself, and receives the laugh he was fishing for. Laughter dries nothing, but it changes the temperature of the mind. Crossings are tests. A stream swollen to a river demands ingenuity. Men wade in shields above heads, teeth bared to cold. Archers post on the far bank to watch the tree fringe. Carpenters lash a makeshift raft for the mules. When the eagle goes across, voices hush. The standard floats for a breath, drips, rises again on the far side, and spines uncoil. On some banks the mud drinks sandals to the ankle. On others stones slide like fish. A young recruit learns the art of falling with dignity, then the finer art of pretending he meant to wash that particular knee. Evening brings the geometry of safety. The first shovelfuls bite dark soil. The ditch takes shape, one neat V around a rectangle that seems to grow from the earth as if the ground remembers the pattern. Vallum rises behind it. 4 gates cut the perimeter Porta Praetoria, facing the likely danger Porta Decumana, behind the others watching flanks. Streets snap into place via Praetoria, via Principalis, via Quintana. Every cohort knows its slot. Fires crackle in shallow pits protected from wind. The bread ovens, portable, squat more precious than they look, exhale a scent that feels like civilization. The cook doling out ladles of barley stew declares himself high priest of morale. Quirky tidbit archaeologists often find game encounters and scratched boards near the places where tents once stood. as if anxiety itself carves time into little contests. Tonight, a pair of dice clack and a low cheer ripples. A centurion pretends not to hear. Supplies run like taut cords back to the fortresses behind them. Wagons bog. A pack mule stares at a puddle with philosophical contempt. A clerk with the patience of a saint counts amphorae by lamp and mutters imprecations against spillage. Foragers move out in fours, return with wild onions, a stringy goat bought for too high a price, and news that a village shuttered its doors before they arrived. The pay chest rides under guard heavy as a promise. When rain backs off, men patch sandals and rub bruised shoulders with oil that smells faintly of home. Light joke number 3, someone raises a cup and toasts to the glorious pacification of dinner, and even the centurion snorts. Distances here measure differently than on the map. From one ridge to the next is a handful of fields. From one usable ford to the next is the length of a story told twice. From morning to night is a catalogue of small victories over footsore cold hunger and the itch of fear that lives under the breastbone. Now and then the cloud ceiling lifts and the day is briefly silver hills stacked like folded cloth. When it drops again, the world becomes 5 paces 10 at most, cut by the white breath of the man in front of you. The open, scholarly debate travels beside them like an extra file in the ranks. Historians still argue whether the Ninth presses far into the country of the later Picts north, toward the River Tay, or even the River Spey, or whether this very march never strays far beyond Eberacum's safety net. Some propose that what looks like a daring incursion is a show of strength, only a few days deep, meant to frighten, not to conquer. Others imagine a serious pusher chess move intended to topple a fragile alliance of hill tribes. The records refuse to declare a winner. The landscape keeps its own counsel. Night Watch layers the camp with rings of listening. First Watch counts the cooking fires shrinking to embers. Second Watch hears fox barks and the tiny crackle of frost forming where the fire forgot to warm. Third Watch tastes the hour when even veterans yawn, and the body begs for blankets. That is when things, if they come, often come. A shadow can be a bush until it is not. A rustle can be wind until it is footsteps. The warder's call passes along the line, the murmured Latin syllables turning into something almost like a lullaby. Somewhere a priest of Jupiter traces a sign in ash. Somewhere else a Briton at the ridge's edge makes a sign of his own toward an older god. Morning always returns even here. The ditch's lip bears the clean edge of good labour. The gate mouths square to the world. The bull standard gathers light as if it grew from it. Men stretch. Curse cheerfully, drink something hot and shoulder their burdens again. The column shakes itself into motion, half cat, half machine. Ahead, the path climbs into mist that refuses to explain itself. The Legion moves into it anyway because that is what legions do. They make a road with their bodies one boot length at a time across ground that does not volunteer surrender. Whether this march ends in parley skirmish triumph or a silence that will trouble future centuries, none of them can yet know. What they do know is simpler. Keep the line mine, the man to your right, answer the horn, do not let the standard dip. The rest belongs to the hills. The torchlight flickers low in the forts along the frontier, casting more shadows than the illumination, while men wrapped in cloaks mutter about the land that never warms. By this point in the story, Legion IX Hispana has already been drawn thin. Its men scattered between watchtowers, marching parties and garrisons that seem to swallow more soldiers than they ever release. The north of Britannia is less welcoming than the sun-washed hills of Hispania, where this legion once earned its name. Here rain needles sideways fog drapes itself across moors, and the sky manages to look perpetually undecided about whether it is day or night. Soldiers learn to dry their sandals over weak fires, only to step into another puddle minutes later, and the endless drum of rain on tent canvas becomes the rhythm of their lives. A mainstream historical fact emerges at this juncture. The 9th Legion is attested in Britannia as late as the early 2nd century of the Common Era, mentioned in building inscriptions at York still patching stone and enforcing Rome's order. That means they had not yet vanished. They were still tangible enough to leave names carved into walls. But after this, the records fall silent, and silence in Roman bureaucracy is rarely accidental. Historians still argue whether the Legion met its fate in some sudden cataclysm in the north, or whether it faded more gradually, broken into detachments that were later absorbed into other units. The paperwork is incomplete, the trail-like footprints washed away by heavy rain. Soldiers themselves did not debate these mysteries, of course. They were too busy shivering boiling porridge that tasted more like damp oats than food, and pretending that the gods of Rome cared as much about this windswept island as about the heart of the empire. The Legion's officers still read out orders in clipped Latin, but their men were now listening to the distant sounds of Celtic horns drifting through mist. To the recruits from Gaul or Germania, those eerie calls sounded almost familiar. To the veterans from Italy, they sounded like omens. Either way, the chill of uncertainty sat heavier than the weight of their chainmail, a quirky tidbit passed down by later writers, with a wink tells that Roman soldiers sometimes carried small clay figurines of household gods, even into campaigns as grim as Britannia. Imagine a grizzled centurion setting a tiny statue of a kitchen deity on a crude wooden shelf inside his barracks hut, muttering that if this god could keep bread from burning, surely he could keep barbarians at bay. Whether or not divine favour truly accompanied these charms, the soldiers cherished them, especially in lands where the sun rarely broke through clouds. It was a way of tethering themselves to home, however small and absurd. The northern tribes, of course, were not idle. They watched Roman lines extend, forts sprout like stubborn weeds, and roads cut deep through their hills. They tested those roads with ambushes melting into forests after hurling stones or darts, leaving the legion chasing shadows. From the Roman perspective, this was infuriating. Where was the honour in an enemy who would not stand still? But from the tribal perspective, why fight a legion face to face when patience, mud and rain could do half the work? Historians still argue whether the Ninth encountered one devastating ambush that erased it from the rolls, or whether dozens of small skirmishes chipped away until its eagle standard was finally lowered in disgrace. The absence of clarity gnaws at every theory like mice at grain sacks. Among the local tales whispered centuries later, there is mention of a battle on a fog-choked plain where Roman helmets glimmered like silver fish before vanishing beneath a tide of tribesmen. Scholars scoff at such folklore, pointing out that legends love to exaggerate, and locals delight in imagining Romans humbled. Yet the persistence of such stories makes one pause. If nothing dramatic had occurred, why would memory cling to the idea of Romans swallowed by mist? Perhaps the fog itself became the metaphor soldiers lost not only to battle, but to the grey oblivion of history. On the human level, imagine the legionaries themselves wading through marsh shoulders, raw from leather straps, muttering that the Empire surely forgot them. One joke repeated until even the most humorless officer chuckled was that the rain here had Roman citizenship by now. If Rome ever tried to tax it, the rain would refuse to pay. Humour became a shield, laughter a weapon against the damp despair. It was easier to laugh at the absurdity of endless wet socks than to dwell on what awaited beyond the next ridge. And what awaited was not always hostile. Some soldiers struck bargains with locals, exchanging Roman trinkets for warm furs or baskets of dried fish. A few tired of orders and cold rations may even have slipped fully into native life, trading legion crests for village hearths. Quirky traces, Roman brooches in tribal graves, amphorae shards in northern huts suggest a mingling that official reports would have found embarrassing. Was this desertion or diplomacy? Historians still argue whether these artifacts represent friendship, survival, or betrayal. The truth, like so much else, hides in the mud. As months turned into years, the legion's paper trail thinned until it broke entirely. Administrators in Rome might have shrugged, assuming the Ninth was simply stationed somewhere inconvenient, or perhaps they buried the omission, deliberately unwilling to admit that an entire legion had winked out in Britannia's gloom. Bureaucracy, after all, could erase with the same efficiency it recorded. For the soldiers, though no quill stroke could change their reality, the watchtowers felt lonelier, the horns more haunting. The road back to warmer lands increasingly a dream. In the end, whether their fate was sudden slaughter, slow absorption, or quiet dispersal into the tribes, the Ninth became less a line in a ledger and more a ghost in the mist. Their shields might once have shone, their standards might once have glittered, but on the northern horizon all that remained was rain swallowing footprints. The legions that once marched with thunderous rhythm along Roman roads began to echo only in whispers, their strength tested not just by enemies with sharp blades, but by the invisible strain of politics, finance, and imperial priorities. Rome, like any empire, is a machine that runs on resources: grain shipments from Egypt, silver from mines, timber from distant forests, and when those gears slip, the ripples reach even to the far corners of Britannia. Legion IX Hispana, stationed in the rugged north, may have felt the weight of this machinery creak beneath them long before any enemy drew near. Soldiers live not only by their discipline but by pay supplies and the knowledge that Rome still cares. When those things waver, even the hardest centurion cannot steady every heart. One mainstream historical fact that grounds this part of the story is that by the early 2nd century, Emperor Hadrian orders the construction of a wall across northern Britain, Hadrian's Wall marking a clear line between Roman-controlled territory and the lands of unconquered tribes. It stretches across roughly 117 kilometres, about 73 miles stone and turf, cut across valleys and hills guarded by mile castles and watchtowers. This wall is not the act of an empire confidently expanding. It is the mark of one trying to draw its breath to hold ground rather than chase conquest. And if the 9th Legion disappears around this same era, it is tempting to connect their fate to this defensive turn. Historians still argue whether the wall is Rome admitting defeat or Rome practicing prudence. The line between the two can be thin as the edge of a sword. But politics reaches even farther. In Rome itself, emperors shuffle through crises, succession disputes, border threats in Dacia and the east, and financial tremors that ripple outward like cracks in marble. When the imperial treasury grows, strained legions on the periphery often feel it first. Pay may arrive, late equipment may wear thin, and recruits may come fewer than needed. The 9th may have stood in the damp north spears, worn smooth sandals patched with local leather, glancing southward and wondering if Rome still remembered their names. One quirky tidbit that makes scholars smile is a pay tablet from Vindolanda, a fort not far from where the 9th may have stood, listing a soldier's expenses, beer grain, even a note for lost sandals. It shows not the grand strategy, but the daily grind, and if wages faltered, the grind grew unbearable. At the same time, Rome faces enemies who understand patience better than Rome's governors do. The Caledonian tribes are not interested in swift victory. They know the land, the weather, and the weaknesses of men far from home. They harass supply lines, cut down foraging parties, and wait for hunger to gnaw louder than any horn. A single bad harvest in a province can spell disaster for legions dependent on shipments from across the sea. Historians still argue whether the 9th faced a perfect storm of these problems: financial strain from Rome, logistical failures in Britannia, and relentless local resistance, or whether a single catastrophic encounter erased them. Imagine a long campaign season stretching on wages, delayed supplies thin, and officers torn between pride and pragmatism. A centurion may try to rally his cohort with promises of Rome's favour, but even he feels the pinch when a wagon fails to arrive. Soldiers grumble, comparing their lot to comrades stationed in warmer climes along the Rhine or in Africa, who drink sweeter wine and march beneath kinder skies. The 9th's loyalty is strong, yet loyalty cannot fill an empty stomach. One joke softly shared among legionaries might have been Rome feeds the world except the men who guard it. The laughter is bitter, but it keeps spirits alive for another day. As the years slip forward, some suggest that the 9th's disappearance is not one moment of annihilation, but the slow bleed of neglect. Cohorts may have been transferred quietly, names erased, or merged their proud eagle standard, sent back to Rome, while the men themselves dissolved into other units. An empire that once trumpeted every victory may have allowed one legion to fade from records rather than admit a loss too humiliating. In this view, the 9th's absence is not a glorious tragedy, but a bureaucratic erasure. Scholars dig through inscriptions, half-effaced names on stones, scraps of writing on wax tablets trying to catch a glimpse of the legion's afterlife. But the trail remains frustratingly thin, as if silence itself were policy. And yet even bureaucratic silence carries drama. Soldiers live and die by being remembered on inscriptions in pay lists, in the shouts of their comrades on the field. To vanish from both history and myth is perhaps the harshest fate of all. Did some of the 9th's veterans limp back south, settle quietly in farmsteads, and tell their grandchildren tales of a legion no one believed existed anymore? Or did they fall in bogs and forests, their bones scattered without a single epitaph? Historians still argue whether we should look for their fate in the mud of Britain, the paperwork of Rome, or the silence between. The pull of politics and economy mixes with the march of armies and the whispers of myth. The 9th stands at that intersection where real men suffer from late rations while emperors debate marble inscriptions thousands of miles away. One can almost picture a soldier sitting by a smoky campfire, wrapping his cloak tighter, muttering that Rome itself may crumble someday if it cannot keep its promises. A companion chuckles and replies, "Then the bards will sing about our sandals more than our swords." The fire crackles and the night presses in, carrying questions that have not yet found answers. By the time decades have rolled past the mysterious vanishing of Legion IX Hispana, the story has begun to take on a life larger than the men themselves. Roman historians, later scholars, poets with their taste for drama, All reach for the scraps of fact and stretch them into something resembling explanation, or perhaps entertainment. The silence left by the Legion is filled not only with guesses, but with imagery so vivid it almost convinces you. And yet, for every scholar who insists the Ninth met their end in Britannia, another waves a different tablet or inscription, and proclaims no, they marched northeast, anywhere but there. The chorus of contradictions is so loud it could almost be mistaken for the sound of marching boots, if you had an especially generous imagination and maybe a glass of wine too many. One mainstream historical fact anchors part of this confusion. An inscription found in Nijmegen in the Netherlands seems to record the presence of the Ninth, or at least remnants of it after the supposed date of its disappearance in Britannia. To some, that little carved record is the final word. They were transferred plain and simple. But others protest, arguing that the unit may have been fragmented, its veterans reassigned, while the core remained behind to be swallowed by Britain's restless frontier. Historians still argue whether that single inscription reflects the whole Legion, or only a detachment. And the maddening thing about inscriptions is they never pause to explain themselves. They just sit in stone smugly confident while centuries of scholars lose sleep over their brevity. As the centuries advance, the narrative of the Ninth begins to mingle with folklore. Medieval chroniclers, peering back through the haze of time, write of a lost Roman army somewhere beneath northern soil entombed like ghosts in iron. Local tales whisper that on cold nights the sound of drums and horns can still be heard under certain hills, as though the Legion never stopped marching, condemned to circle the landscape forever. Quirky tidbit, some Victorian antiquarians fond of mixing earnest scholarship with a dash of melodrama claimed that ploughmen in York once turned up bones in tight formation, and without hesitation announced clearly the Ninth still standing. Of course, the bones in question usually turned out to be cattle or horses, which somewhat spoiled the solemn mood, but the stories were too good to abandon. In the 19th and 20th centuries, with archaeology gaining tools sharper than spades and guesswork, the fate of the Ninth was debated as though it were a courtroom trial. One historian produced a map of Hadrian's Wallfinger stabbing at a gap, declaring that the Legion perished in a surprise raid before the stones were even set. Another countered with finds from the continent diagrams in hand, demanding we admit the Legion simply moved, absorbed quietly into the ever-shuffling puzzle of Rome's military bureaucracy. And then, like all good scholarly quarrels, the arguments grew personal letters, laced with polite venom reviews that praised a book's clarity while subtly comparing its conclusions to a child's drawing. The Legion's absence became less a question of history and more a stage for academic theatre. The tale, however, never lost its pull on popular imagination. In novels, plays, and later films, the Ninth is resurrected again and again, sometimes as tragic heroes, sometimes as victims of betrayal, sometimes as men who simply vanish into the mists. A mainstream cultural echo lingers in Rosemary Sutcliffe's The Eagle of the Ninth, where a young Roman sets out to recover the Legion's lost standard from the mysterious North. That single motif, the missing eagle, has done more to cement the Ninth's legend in the public mind than a dozen dusty inscriptions. And honestly, who can resist the image of a gleaming standard hidden in a hostile land waiting to be reclaimed? It is history meets treasure hunt, irresistible to the imagination. Joke number one for this stretch. One modern professor confessed during a lecture that he secretly hoped never to find definitive proof about the Ninth, because in his words, a solved mystery is just homework with an answer key. The students laughed partly because they agreed, partly because the exam on Roman Britain was the following week, and they would have paid good money for a proper answer key. Meanwhile, archaeology kept delivering small surprises but no conclusive ending. At York, fragments of tiles stamped with the Legion's mark still surfaced quietly, reminding everyone that yes, the Ninth had once been flesh, blood and bureaucracy, not just a legend. At Carlisle, bits of fortifications hint at troops stationed longer than previously assumed. And in Scotland, earthworks and burned layers tell of battles whose combatants we can sketch in outline but never name with certainty. Historians still argue whether any of these traces represent the Ninth's final stand, or merely the churn of garrisons rotating endlessly along the Empire's most stubborn frontier. As decades turn to centuries, the Ninth morphs into something more than a missing regiment. It becomes a parable. For military historians, it is a reminder that no institution, however disciplined, is immune to vanishing. For poets, it is a tragedy of men erased from memory, their voices drowned by peat and moss. For modern readers, it is a bedtime story of how even the greatest empire can lose track of thousands of soldiers without a tidy footnote. The Legion's disappearance becomes less about what literally happened, and more about what absence does it fertilises myth. Quirky tidbit number 2. In the early 20th century, a Scottish tourist guide cheerfully told visitors that the reason midges were so numerous in the Highlands was that they had developed a taste for Roman blood ever since the 9th march north. It was not true, of course, but it made for a memorable pamphlet, and perhaps some poor hiker slapping furiously at his neck found the joke less amusing in the moment. The image of the 9th resonates because it invites the audience to fill in the blank. Were they ambushed by Caledonian tribes, their armour glinting one last time in a morning fog? Did they board ships and sail away, leaving Britain behind without fanfare? Did they scatter in fragments across provinces, their names swallowed by the Empire's bureaucratic churn? Historians still argue whether their disappearance is a singular event or the messy erosion of a unit across decades. What remains clear is that the mystery has achieved something rare. It has outlived the facts themselves. Joke number 3 slips in with a wink. If the 9th had actually survived intact, one imagines them rolling their eyes across the centuries muttering, "We didn't vanish, we just transferred while sipping wine in some quiet provincial outpost." But since they left no clarifying memo, they remain forever missing, condemned to haunt footnotes, documentaries, and of course, bedtime stories like this one. And so, as the legend rolls forward, the 9th ceases to be just a lost regiment. They become a symbol of history's greatest magic trick, the ability to erase certainty while leaving echoes that keep us talking late into the night. Each theory, each novel, each tourist joke is a candle lit in the fog, illuminating nothing for long, but keeping the darkness fascinating. And that perhaps is why the 9th endures, not because we know their fate, but because we don't. Snow does not blanket Britannia the way it does the Alps, yet the northern climate gnaws at the bones of anyone stationed there too long. Legion IX's absence becomes most haunting, not in the mud of battle, but in the crisp silence of records that stop mid-sentence. After Agricola's campaigns, after Hadrian begins his famous wall, the list of Roman legions becomes strangely lopsided. Legion Hispana, once proudly inscribed, fades like chalk left in rain. Later rosters in Rome name other units, yet this one 4,000 to 5,000 strong simply drops out. Mainstream historical fact reminds us that by the early 2nd century the legion no longer appears in standard Roman army rolls. The paperwork gap is not proof of destruction, but it is proof of disappearance. That silence rattles louder than spears. In York, the fortress stone still bears scars of Roman chisels. Some archaeologists point to repairs around 108 CE, as hints that something nasty happened. A wall rebuilt in haste mortar different than the usual recipe timber foundations laid oddly thick. Historians still argue whether these patches mark routine maintenance, or a desperate fix after an attack that chewed a hole in the defences. The absence of bones, shields, or dramatic inscriptions makes the puzzle harder. A massacre leaves corpses, an orderly redeployment leaves scrolls. Here we have neither. Instead, we have gaps like teeth knocked out of a smile, and from those gaps, speculation pours. One theory insists Nye marched north into Caledonia, hoping to suppress yet another rebellion. The tribes there had already fought Rome to a bloody stalemate at Mons Graupius. Imagine the legion trudging through heather mist, soaking their cloaks, breath frosting in the air. A whisper of ambush coils through the glens. Arrows arc from unseen ridges, stones crash down, and whole cohorts vanish in a storm of spears. Quirky tidbit, one fringe writer even compared the legion's disappearance to the way hikers vanish in the Scottish Highlands today, swallowed by bogstorm or bad luck. Except this was thousands of trained soldiers, not a lone rambler in neon rain gear. The sheer scale makes the story feel less like history and more like myth. Others see the mystery as paperwork sleight of hand. Perhaps the legion transferred quietly to another frontier Germany, Judea, even the Danube. Some inscriptions hint at Stice's veterans settling in Nijmegen in the Netherlands. Yet the timelines wobble. Was that detachment the last remnant of a shattered legion, or simply a leftover cohort reassigned while the rest perished? Historians still argue whether the unit was extinguished in Britannia, or merely renamed elsewhere, folded into another legion like a dissolved company swallowed by a larger corporation. Bureaucracy is rarely dramatic, but sometimes it hides drama better than a shovel hides dirt. The silence in Britain becomes heavier when paired with local legends. Northern tribes pass down tales of red-cloaked invaders driven into marshes and slaughtered. Oral traditions are slippery, yet they offer tantalizing shadows. One story tells of a river running red for 3 days. Another insists the gods of the hills devoured the foreign army whole. Do we trust folklore shaped by centuries of retelling, Or do we see in it a faint echo of something Rome never wanted written down? Like joke number 1, if the Legion really did vanish in a swamp, at least the midges feasted like emperors. Archaeology feeds the mystery rather than starves it. Excavations at York show a fortress gradually shrinking in size, as though the army itself thins like watered wine. Abandoned barracks reuse stones, fewer inscriptions praising commanders. The civic life around the fortress carries on, but without its great anchor tenant. It is like a modern town losing its biggest employer. The economy limps, the voices change, and nobody prints a cheerful notice explaining why. Meanwhile in Rome, emperors shuffle legions like chess pieces. Trajan campaigns in Dacia. Hadrian rethinks borders. In this grand board game, a missing legion might be inconvenient to mention. Was it shameful to admit a total loss to northern tribes, or simply easier to erase than to explain? Historians still argue whether silence was a deliberate cover-up, or just the natural erosion of records in an empire with too many crises to track. Empires do not always collapse with bangs, sometimes they forget with shrugs. Picture then the last march of 9 not as trumpets and banners, but as muddy boots, aching shoulders, and a line of men fading into fog. Somewhere in those hills a story ended without an ending. A mainstream historian once noted that if Ikes had been destroyed in Asia, or Judea records would probably trumpet the tragedy. But in Britannia, remote and embarrassing, the news might never have been worth exporting. Quirky tidbit 2, one scholar suggested the Legion's name became unlucky, whispered like a curse, so new units refused to adopt the numeral 9 for centuries. Whether true or not, the legend of bad luck clung like burrs to the vanished banner. Even today, schoolchildren in York walk past stones once trod by IX Hispana. They peer at Latin inscriptions behind glass reading names of centurions whose fate ends in ellipses. Tour guides shrug, scholars lecture, tourists snap photos. The mystery persists not because answers are absent, but because the silence itself feels like an answer. Light joke number 2. If Netflix ever dramatizes, it expect a cliffhanger that never resolves, because history already beat them to it. As the night deepens, over Britannia winds whistle through the ruins. The ghosts of Nuss linger in speculation, neither buried in graves nor paraded in triumph. Their story becomes an echo chamber filled with theories bouncing like pebbles in a jar. Were they wiped out, transferred, or simply erased? Historians still argue whether we should even frame it as disappearance or bureaucratic forgetfulness. And so the Legion's legacy becomes not certainty, but the lull of unanswered questions, perfect fuel for late-night wandering when silence feels loudest. Light joke number 3. Somewhere. A long-retired Roman clerk is laughing that his lost paperwork has puzzled scholars for 2,000 years. If so, he has the longest-running practical joke in history. The disappearance of the 9th Legion slips at last into the long twilight of memory. Rome itself continues bruised, but standing its empire stretching across continents, its administrators still stamping wax seals and tallying grain. But the 9th does not return to roll call. No centurion answers when names are called, no cohort reforms on the parade ground. Instead, what lingers are shadows, rumours in the marketplaces of York, hints in inscriptions half erased by lichen, and the lingering question of how a Roman legion could dissolve without leaving a neat record behind. The historian's frustration becomes the storyteller's gift, for the absence itself is a canvas upon which theories bloom like stubborn weeds. One mainstream historical fact does steady the imagination: the 9th Legion does appear in earlier Roman documents stationed in Britain in the late 1st century. After that, the trail grows faint. Inscriptions that ought to mention them instead fall silent. The military paperwork, usually so meticulous, offers no obituary. This absence of evidence becomes the evidence of absence, at least to some, yet even this conclusion carries hesitation, for scholars still argue whether silence means destruction or relocation. Bureaucracy, after all, is only as strong as the clerks who survive to file it. Theories of their fate unfurl like sails. Perhaps they perished in a great northern uprising swarmed by tribes who knew the forest better than armoured men ever could. Perhaps they marched east, folded into campaigns on the continent, their identity slowly absorbed into other legions, until the name itself faded. Or perhaps more thrilling to those who prefer a ghost story, they deserted, scattering across foreign lands, their shields buried in rivers, their Latin swallowed by strange dialects. Fringe suggestions even whisper of annihilation by supernatural means, though those belong less to archaeology and more to late-night tavern tales. A quirky tidbit persists in popular culture in the 19th century. Writers seized upon the 9th's vanishing as fertile ground for novels. Romantic visions of lost legions battling mist-shrouded foes captured imaginations far more powerfully than footnotes ever could. One book even imagined a single surviving standard-bearer guarding the Legion's eagle in secret, a lonely sentinel against forgetting. Such fictions, though far removed from evidence, echo the emotional truth people dislike loose ends, and so they weave stories to tie them off. As centuries pass, the missing Legion grows larger in absence than it ever did in presence. Their mystery becomes a mirror of our own fascination with uncertainty. Historians still argue whether the Legion's disappearance is a true riddle, or simply the mundane result of paperwork gone astray. Yet the debate endures precisely because the evidence refuses to close the case. Silence keeps the fire burning. Like joke number 1 for this section, if the Legion really did desert, imagine the awkward introductions. Hello, we're just 1,000 heavily armed tourists looking for a place to settle. Hope that's not a problem. Like joke number 2, should ghosts of the Ninth still march, they probably complain that modern historians never stop asking for interviews. Like joke number 3. If the soldiers themselves could weigh in, they might say, "Our greatest achievement was vanishing so well that 2 millennia later you're still talking about us." So the Ninth Hispana lives on not in muster rolls or triumphal arches, but in questions. Their story is the pause between beats the missing page in a chronicle, the hollow echo, where marching boots should resound. And as the listener drifts, the mystery remains unsolved, unending, and strangely comforting. And now let the restless speculation fade into stillness. The Legion's boots no longer strike stone, the banners no longer whip in the wind. All that remains is quiet of ruined forts under ivy, quiet of fields where iron once clashed, quiet of scholars whispering over fragments. As night deepens, that quiet shifts into calm. Picture the northern mists rolling over green hills, softening the jagged lines of ramparts long abandoned. Once soldiers stamped their feet against the chill, waiting for dawn orders. Tonight only owls and foxes keep watch. The Legion's campfires, once bright against the darkness, have cooled into ash centuries old, their warmth lingering only in memory. Breathe with the rhythm of that silence. Each inhale recalls the strength of men who carried shields through rain and snow. Each exhale releases the tension of not knowing where they went. It does not matter if they perished in battle, marched into obscurity, or simply dissolved into the folds of empire. Their riddle is part of the world's lullaby, now an unanswered question rocking gently like a boat on still water. Let your thoughts drift with it. The waves that once bore Roman ships now soothe the shores. The stones that once rang with orders now rest under moss. History does not insist on conclusions tonight. It invites you instead into its hush, where mysteries cradle the mind and let it rest. So close your eyes, soften your breathing, and surrender to the stillness. The Ninth Legion may be gone, but in their silence they offer something gentler than certainty, peace. And in that peace, you can finally sleep.